Greetings and welcome, I'm Ash, and this is my port analysis and first impressions for the PC version of Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen. I'm going to divide this video into two parts. The first will be related to my gameplay experiences after 3 or so hours of playtime, while the second will be a port analysis. So if you are just looking for the information on the port itself, click here. Bing! Okay, let's move on to the gameplay. Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen is an action RPG originally released for the Xbox 360 and PS3 back in the distant past of 2012, a savage time where people actually believed the world is ending. It features an incredibly realized combat system with plenty of spells and skills to choose from, and most importantly, the ability to climb all over your foes and stab them where it really hurts. After you go through the very short tutorial, you will be presented with a character creation screen, which is fairly in-depth as far as the visual aspects go. You are able to fine-tune almost every attribute of your physique and create some truly unique characters, or monstrosities if that's your thing. I have to give special mention to the hairstyling options, as there are over 40 of them and they don't discriminate based on gender. If you want to be a dude with giant ponytails, that's up to you. The same goes if you want to be a female character with more of a tomboyish sort of hair. It is such a simple feature when you really think about it, but it means a lot when it comes to personalization. Another thing that surprised me is that your physical attributes actually matter, even if it's a very slight difference. For example, taller characters are able to climb higher ledges, while shorter ones are capable of squeezing through tighter passages. In the end, I'd imagine both options are basically equal, but it is a cool addition nonetheless. The one area I feel Dragon's Dogma is a bit lacking is directly after the tutorial, when you are dumped into the world with no direction or idea what you're supposed to be doing. Given that this is the earliest section of the game, one that's supposed to grip you into the world and never let go, it's a bit strange that Dragon's Dogma allows you to run off in the completely wrong direction with no payoff at the end of the trip, only more sand. But once you finally stop faffing about and head out into the world, Dragon's Dogma quickly picks up the slack by having you fight not one, not even two, but 3 giant mythical creatures in the span of a single hour. Now that is how you get players excited. So how exactly does the combat work? First of all, unlike similar ARPGs such as Dark Souls, in Dragon's Dogma you travel with a group of allies called pawns, a race of human-like constructs which help you out by fulfilling roles you cannot. Since I initially chose a fighter class, I opted to roam around with a strider, a ranger rogue hybrid, as well as a mage whose healing and buffing abilities proved invaluable. While I was initially skeptical about the system, the pawns proved to be fun travel companions, as they had plenty to say about the scenery, the quest you're on, or just how much they hate goblins. But perhaps the biggest feature is that they are just as loot hungry as you are, so if you run across a bunch of herbs out in the wilderness, you don't have to gather it all alone. The pawns will be more than glad to pick it all up for you. After you're done with the first little area, you will be able to create your very own pawn who, besides simply being your BFF, functions as your connection to other players. There are no invasions or co-op multiplayer in Dragon's Dogma. Instead, you are able to hire pawns who come from other players and use them to help you out in your adventures. If you hire a pawn, for example, that has a ton of experience battling griffins, he will use that knowledge to help you out by giving you either specific tips or aiming for the weak spots himself. It is a rather cool system and makes you feel like these are actual people, even though they're not even in the game, but that's besides the point. As for your main character, the Arisen, you have access to the same spells and attacks your pawns do, but you will need to train them at local trainers. The first few talents are rather basic. For me, it was a shield charge and a backstep attack, but from what I've seen in the list, they do definitely get more interesting as you go on. The combat, from what I've experienced so far, feels pretty damn good, especially against some of the bigger monsters out there where you need to crawl over them like an angry ant as they try to swat you off. Overall, it has a nice balance between weight and style, even though I will say the warrior's early skills are far less flashy than those of the strider or mage, but that will hopefully change as I level up further. Once you finally assemble your team of pawns, you will for the first time be allowed to freely roam the map, and let me just tell you this right now, there are some things you should not piss off. Namely, the 5-meter tall troll that has a habit of using humans as toothpicks. Don't take that as a complaint though, I love the idea of there simply being monsters too powerful for you to take on as a low level character because it adds real weight and danger to the world. Speaking of danger, do not leave the city walls at night unless you are truly prepared to face the dangers that lurk in the shadows. And I'll give you a hint, you probably won't be early on. Nights and caves can get pitch dark, so you'll have to carry oil lanterns with you, and if those start to run out in the middle of the fight, well, let's just say it doesn't end pretty, but at least you won't see it coming. A much smarter idea is to take the nights off and take a little bit of rest and relaxation, as fatigue is a thing in Dragon's Dogma and it affects your maximal health. As you run around the world and take hits from everyone and everything, your maximum HP will decrease, making you much more likely to die. You can stave this off through herbs, potions, or even simply resting, and while the mechanic is a bit arbitrary, it is a good way to know when to take a break and restock in the cities. So, in conclusion, I would say that after my 3 or so hours, I'm more than happy with Dragon's Dogma. I might be slightly biased as I was waiting and hoping for it to come to PC for a couple of years now, but even so, it is a very solid game with interesting mechanics and a novel take on the party system. It's also worth mentioning that even in the early game you have plenty of diverse choices to make and a lot of content available to you, so replayability is going to be high. Perhaps the best way I can offer praise for Dragon's Dogma is to say I'm most definitely looking forward to playing more of it, and that my money spent with it is so far well spent. With the gameplay done, I would like to focus now on the analysis of the port itself. First and foremost, I have to commend Capcom for supporting seamless transitions between controller and keyboard. The moment I plugged in my controller, it instantly started working and the game recognized it without a hitch. Not just that, you also have 6 different preset control schemes for your controller to use, a feature not often seen these days. The only annoyance here is that plugging and unplugging the controller kicks you to the main menu, but that doesn't matter much as you'll have to deal with this only once and never again. As for the keyboard itself, you can rebind everything, so if you don't like the default controls, it's all good, you can change them. The audio is a bit tricky, however. The in-game voices are far quieter than the music and combat noise, so you're going to either deafen yourself or miss out on all of the dialogue if you go with the defaults. I'd recommend raising the system sound but lowering music and sound effects to achieve a nice balance. The Gameplay Options tab is well equipped and will allow you a good degree of customization. I, however, went with the defaults here and I haven't had the need or reason to change anything just yet. Finally, the video options. For the most part, all of these are reasonably standard settings with nothing to really complain about. I'd recommend setting the anti-aliasing to FXAA3HQ as that one proved to cause the least amount of blurriness and in general worked pretty well. The FPS is initially capped at 60, but even with a remotely powerful rig you can just put it on variable and reap the benefits of triple-digit FPS without much of a sweat. Also, a feature most people probably don't even notice or care about is that if you max out some of the settings, the arrow on the right side disappears. I'm betting this is something that only interests me, but I like to mash the button, which often results in the setting just reverting back to ultra low. This is one of those small features that doesn't really matter, but makes you realize that the developers really do care about their game. And oddly enough, there is an FOV slider for a third-person game. You don't see that very often. I personally went with the default here as well, because I like to really get into my character, but I'm very glad the option is there, as even FPS games these days seem to slack off on adding FOV sliders. The graphics are a bit of a mixed bag, as you might imagine given that Dragon's Dogma originated on consoles, which even at that point were fairly old. Don't get me wrong though, the game looks good and it's most definitely stylish enough to overcome any of its flaws, but the poor textures are a fact. Characters, armor and buildings are generally done quite well, but the rocks, shrubs, mountains and ground textures are not so lucky. Unfortunately, some of the rocks are just a blurry mess and most of the ground-based grass is just obviously a 2D sprite bolted onto the floor. But the biggest issue by far are the pop-ups. Taking a few steps forward and backwards, even with the draw distance maxed, can spawn and despawn entire stretches of forest, which just looks terrible. The problem is especially apparent when you're running down a flat meadow, as you can clearly see where the draw distance ends, and this is with the maxed out setting. Don't worry though, it doesn't affect gameplay in any way, but it is, however, Dragon's Dogma's greatest weakness. On the positive side, the performance, stability, and FPS are without complaint. I have locked myself to 60 FPS as a test, and I have very rarely ever dropped even a few FPS below that, and in my 3 or so hours of play, I have also never suffered a crash or even a single stutter. Dragon's Dogma definitely has a few issues when it comes to the graphical department, but are they enough to sour the entire port? I'd say that's a definite no, because while the textures and pop-in might be annoying, you're not gonna be paying much attention to a random background rock as you're climbing a chimera, are you now? On the other hand, anything related to smooth combat such as FPS, stability, creature and player textures are well done, and honestly, despite me going on a bit of a complaining spree here, the situation is not actually that bad. So which control system is better, the keyboard and mouse or the controller? Well, you'll be happy to know that both are equally viable and come with their own strengths and weaknesses, so whichever you choose, you'll be perfectly fine. The controller is slightly better when it comes to precise footwork in battles, especially against smaller opponents, while the keyboard is far superior when it comes to inventory management, as you can keybind up to 5 items for easy use, something you would have to do through menus with the controller. Other than those small differences, I would say that they are pretty much the same, given that you can rebind or change almost all of the buttons and keys on them, which is a pretty good feature. So here's the gist of it when it comes to the quality of the PC port and Dragon's Dogma itself. So if it wasn't obvious, allow me to say it out loud. Dragon's Dogma is a good PC port. It suffers from some issues that are caused by its console upbringing, as you can't really upscale low quality textures into HQ ones like its CSI. But overall, it's a nice looking game with a great style to it and some rock solid performance. I, for one, enjoyed my time with Dragon's Dogma, and I look forward to playing more of it. Thank you guys for listening, and if you enjoyed this, please do leave a like, and it's helping me a lot, and if you would like to see more, you can either subscribe here or check out the website linked down below. That one tends to be updated more frequently. With all of that said, I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you soon. See ya!